Hello everyone, my name is John Sierra and I am a Tolkien scholar, and I'm here to answer your questions about The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, or any other of Tolkien's works, or even J.R.R. Tolkien himself. And as always, I have a good amount of questions to get through, so let's get through them. If you want one of your questions answered, you can leave me a comment, of course, but the preferred way to do it is if you look in the description. There is a link to my Quora account, and it's very easy to make an account on Quora, or you could just sign in with, I think, either a Google account or a Facebook account. Ask your question on there and just tag me in it. And if I like it, I will definitely answer, as long as it's, not something really insane, but if I like it, I will include it in the video as well. So let's get to it. I have 15 questions to get through. Let's see what we have here. Okay, so first up, here's a question submitted by Alice Stone, who asks, if you were making a comic book or graphic novel adaptation of Tolkien's works, who would you want to do the artwork? So this is, I think, a quick and easy answer for me. I think it's a little outside the box because I'm not pulling from someone who is a typical, superhero artist, because that's what most people think of when they think of comic books. I hit the mic and I'm sorry. They think of superheroes. I'm going to go a little outside because I'm going to go to somebody who has done a very long fantasy comic, and that would be Jeff Smith, who is mostly known for the comic Bone. So, and I believe Bone was actually inspired by The Lord of the Rings. I saw it as sort of like, what if The Lord of the Rings was distorted through the prism of classic Disney shorts with the three primary cartoonish characters that sort of resembled, at least in personality, Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Goofy. And, that's all well and good, but if you look at his artwork, he's really good at the scenery, and that's why I would pick him. His human characters that are not like the three Bone brothers, and his creatures are all very detailed and very good, but mainly it's his attention to detail, the scenery. Tolkien spent a great deal of time describing scenery, especially in The Lord of the Rings. So you would want that to be faithfully represented. And considering that he wrote Bone as something that was sort of akin to The Lord of the Rings, I would definitely say that he would be probably jumping at the opportunity to draw a comic strip based on that. Okay. Next up, this question was asked by Phil Scovis, who asked, does the Black Speech in The Lord of the Rings have only 3 vowels? So from what we know of the Black Speech of Mordor, we cannot ascertain fully how many vowels it has. And there's a lot of reasons why we can't do that. But the main thing is there is no written mode to the Black Speech. We can ask how many vowel sounds there are, and there's probably a lot of vowel sounds. Just like any language has a lot of vowel sounds. But as for actual vowels, letters, well, there was no alphabet for the Black Speech. The longest bit of the Black Speech that we have heard and seen in The Lord of the Rings was the inscription on the One Ring. Ash Naz Durbatuluk, Ash Naz Grimbatul, Ash Naz Thrat Katulik, Ash Berzum Ishi Krimpatul. And that, of course, translates to one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. So this was Sauron speaking into the ring when he created it, and it inscribed onto the ring, but as there was no alphabet for his language, the Black Speech of Mordor, he used what's called the Feanorian letters, that alphabet, or what we would call Tengwar script. It's an elven mode, but it can apply to pretty much any language. It could apply to Sindarin, it could apply to Quenya, it could apply to Westron, Common Speech, English, Klingon, whatever you can think of, right? And of course the Black Speech of Mordor. There are various symbols that represent all the different sorts of mouth sounds you could make. Now, if you look at the way that it's written out when Tolkien writes it in English, you can see that there are 3 vowels that he uses, A, U, and I. You don't see any O's, and you don't see any E's, and you don't see any other vowels, right? So, it's a small sample, and you can't really tell if maybe it's just a coincidence that there's no O or there's no E. Maybe there are plenty of black speech words that you might put an O or an E in. But Tolkien didn't do that, and it didn't have a written mode. So when you translate to an approximation of what the written version would look like in English, based on that Tengwar script and what it sounds like, you get that. So speaking of vowels, so like, okay, Burzum, right? That's a word in there. Burzum, it means darkness. It has two U's because it's B-U-R and then Z-U-M, Burzum. So you get the and you get the two different sounds from the same letter, a U. Now, then you get that T-U-L suffix, right? You get Gimbatul, which means find them. Krimpatul, bind them, right? So that tool is like an O-O sound, but we use a U. So it could be written as an O-O, and that wouldn't be wrong because Tolkien was translating from a fantasy language that doesn't have a written mode to another fantasy language that does have a written mode to a real-life language. He could have chosen to write it Krimbatul as ending in O-O-L, but he didn't choose that. So, you know, that's the weird thing about vowels. There's a lot of vowels, right? But when it comes to an alphabet, we can't really say how many vowels there are because it doesn't have an alphabet. It's not a fully fleshed out language like Sindarin or Quenya are. It's not very developed. It's barely glossed. We only know a few words here and here. That's the longest bit of the black speech that we know. So, you know, when talking about the black speech of Mordor, it's a lot of conjecture, it's a lot of guesswork, and it's a lot of I don't knows. So we can say that there might only be 3 vowels, but that there might not be an E, for example, which is pretty wild because in English, E is the most commonly used vowel, but this is obviously, you know, an alien language. So I hope I was able to shed some light on that. It's a hard one to answer. Okay, so this next one was submitted anonymously, and this person asks, if Sauron never had his ring, would he have been just as powerful? So this sort of depends on how you view power. How do you define what power is? As many people define power as simply strength of might. The One Ring did not make Sauron more powerful. And you could even say that it might have made him less powerful because it gave him a weakness. His enemies could destroy the ring and therefore bring him low. Now, the way that Tolkien viewed power, though, is very different because in the way that he looked at the One Ring, it made him incredibly powerful, much greater than he was. Sauron put his essence, his soul, into the One Ring, and that means that part of his power exists separately from his body. It's outside of his frame. It's put into an implement. Now, you could say that made him weaker because he has a certain amount of power, right? And now some of it is not within him, it's separate from him. But the form factor for his implement that he chose was a ring. He could wear the ring and he could wield that power. So in choosing that, he basically kept his power level, so to speak. And I don't like to use that term when referring to the Lord of the Rings, but a lot of people like that term, the power level. It remained consistent. It didn't go up. It didn't go down. And it was important for Sauron to put power into something that he could keep. Because his master, Morgoth, in the first age, he saw this happen a lot, put his power into a lot of different things, even the planet itself. And that wound up spreading Morgoth's power throughout all of Arda, and that made him mighty in a sense, but it also personally within his frame, he became weaker because his power was elsewhere. So in moving his power around like this, he's just shifting it from one place to another, but he's keeping that close to home by wearing the ring. So you might say he gained a vulnerability, as I alluded to earlier, but he was careful that he created an implement. It wasn't like a crown that could be knocked off or something like that. It was a ring. He could wear it, right? And he made it incredibly hard to destroy. There was only one place that it could be destroyed, and it was so seductive that no one would wish to destroy it. Anyone great enough to attempt it would be taken by the ring, in a sense. So, from the perspective of J.R.R. Tolkien, the One Ring did make him more powerful because it gave him dominion over others. Anyone who wore a ring of power could be controlled by that spell, one ring to rule them all, right? One ring to bind them. So, by being found and bound and ruled, he has dominion over others. It's not the same as Sauron personally being more powerful, but it gives him power over others, so it spreads him out without spreading himself thin, right? And it was a success. It was a little bit of a bumpy ride at first. It didn't really work out with the elves. It definitely didn't work out with the dwarves. It worked out really well with men. He got the Nazgul. The Nazgul wound up being his most powerful servants, his most loyal servants, because they are bound to him. They are forever bound to him. They could not ever be released from him. And they were obviously terrible creatures that terrorized Middle-earth and did his bidding. So you could say that definitely he extended his reach in a more successful way than Morgoth did, because he didn't make himself personally weaker. At least until the ring was separated from him. Okay, so thank you. Good question. All right, next question, also an anonymous one. And this person asks, what happened to the 9 after the One Ring was destroyed? So the more accurate version of this question would be what happened to the 8. Because the 9, of course, referring to the Nazgul, one of them was already destroyed. The Witch King, he had died, or had been destroyed is a more accurate form of saying it, on the fields of Pelennor by Eowyn and Merry. So he was already gone. There were 8 Nazgul left, and they were fighting at the Moranon. They were attacked by the Eagles, and then Frodo declared himself master of the One Ring at Samath Naur. Sauron saw Frodo, and he sent out a yell. He called for the Nazgul to intercede, but it was far too late. By the time the Nazgul would have gotten there, the ring was already gone, right? So what happened to them? Well, they just sort of disintegrated. And I'm going to read you the passage where that happened. A brief vision he had of swirling cloud, and in the midst of it towers and battlements tall as hills, founded upon a mighty mountain throne above immeasurable pits, great courts and dungeons, eyeless prisons sheer as cliffs, and gaping gates of steel and adamant, and then all passed. Towers fell and mountains slid, walls crumbled and melted, crashing down. Vast spires of smoke and spouting steams went billowing up until they toppled like an overwhelming wave, and its wild crest curled and came foaming down upon the land. And then at last, over the miles between, there came rumble. Rising to a deafening crash and roar, the earth shook, the plain heaved and cracked, and Orodruin reeled. Fire belched from its riven summit. The skies burst into thunder seared with lightning. Down like lashing whips fell a torrent of black rain, and into the heart of the storm, with a cry that pierced all the other sounds, tearing the clouds asunder, the Nazgul came, shooting like flaming bolts, as caught in the fiery ruin of hill and sky they crackled, withered, and went out. So, once the ruling ring, the One Ring, had been destroyed, it's gone, right? All of the powers of all the other rings of power, they lost their magic. Their power was gone. Because that power was the magic of Sauron. Even the 3 rings, the Elven rings, they were created without his input. He never touched them, but they were still created by his means and his craft that he had taught to Celebrimbor. So it was still his magic. They were still his rings, regardless. So the Nazgul were mortals, and they were men. They were men from places like Numenor or Rhûn, and they were certainly not immortal, but they were denied the gift of man due to the fact that they had these rings, and that they were wraiths. They were undead, and they were lingering in the world. Once this power was gone, it's like thousands of years catching up with them all at once, and there was nothing keeping them bound to Arda anymore. So they just, as Tolkien put it, exactly, crackled, withered, and went out. And he described it, in a simile as being what it would have been like if they were caught in Mount Doom's eruption, that they flamed, they sputtered, and poof, gone. Good question. Okay, so this next question was asked by Roger Calico, and he asked if Saruman, instead of Gandalf, if Saruman had encountered the Balrog in Moria, could he have used the power of his voice on it? Oh, well, he could have tried. It's important to understand the nature of Saruman's voice, the power of voice. It's not hypnosis. It's not domination. It's persuasion. It's charisma. He doesn't get the target or the targets to be under his control. They don't become his puppets. They don't go into a trance. But he gets you to agree with him. He's just that persuasive. This is dependent on what Tolkien refers to as the stature of the target. He could maybe convince them so thoroughly that they basically become his thralls, and that the effect of the voice is permanent. Or it might end as soon as Saruman stops talking, right? So in the chapter, The Voice of Saruman, we see this happen. Saruman speaks, he uses the power of his voice, and there are several key characters there that are just not really affected by it. Gandalf, Theoden, Merry, Pippin, Gimli, Legolas, they're not affected by it. There's Rohirrim there who are affected by it, and it's a temporary effect, right? All the other characters, the high-profile characters that I mentioned, they sort of shrug it off, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were forewarned about the power of his voice. Saruman sort of banks on being underestimated. If his opponent knows what's going to happen, if they know about the power of the voice, they are, forewarned is forearmed, as they say. Now, Durin's Bane, the Balrog, had managed to shrug off some of Gandalf's magic pretty easily. The door-closing spell was countered. Gandalf thought that was impossible. He used a word of command, and the counterspell to that destroyed the door, caused an explosion, sent Gandalf careening down the stair, almost killed him right there. So we cannot dismiss a Balrog as being a purely physical creature, just brute force. They are very magical as well. They have wisdom, they have magic. They are intelligent creatures. They are crafty. They're not dumb brute force. So Saruman might be able to convince the Balrog that he's of no concern, he's not a threat, and to allow him to pass. But I don't think that he could bring the Balrog into his service or cause it to do anything that it wouldn't have wanted to do already. He wouldn't have been able to exercise that much control. He might have just been able to use his voice as a means of escaping. And I think that's as far as it would have gone. Okay. Next question was anonymously submitted, and this person asks, did J.R.R. Tolkien intend to depict Sauron as the devil of Middle-earth and possibly of our own world? If so, how much of this is made clear in The Lord of the Rings? So Sauron would be a devil, right? Not the devil, but a devil. If there's a the devil, it's Morgoth, right? Morgoth was unquestionably the devil of Tolkien's world. Morgoth, in his youth, he was called Melkor. He created the entire concept of evil. He imbued his dark ambitions and thoughts into the music that created the universe. He fought against the Valar. He marred the world several times. He created the orcs. He created the dragons. He created the trolls. He created Mount Doom, and many, many other things. He's the big bad. He is the Satan of Tolkien's world. Sauron, by comparison, is a servant of Morgoth, who he basically took over the business of being the Dark Lord after Morgoth was banished beyond the doors of night into the endless void. So he has alternatively fashioned himself as Morgoth's representative or Morgoth's replacement, and sometimes he would even basically claim to be Morgoth. That's kind of what he did in Numenor. He started a cult that worshipped Morgoth, and then he basically changed it to, you worship me as if I am Morgoth. So while Sauron terrorized Middle-earth for, all throughout the Second Age and the Third Age, Morgoth was there not just in the First Age, but before that. since the beginning of time. Throughout the years of the lamps and the years of the trees, that was a much longer time period than the second or third age, or even the second and third age put together. And it's by his design that there's even anything that is evil. Even Sauron's fall could be attested to Morgoth, right? None of the Maia would have fallen if he didn't put his dark ambitions into the music. So, there was even a prophecy that he might return. They called it Digor Digoroth. He would destroy the sun and terrorize Middle-earth one last time before finally being destroyed completely. So, yeah, Sauron isn't the Satan analog. It's Morgoth. So he would be a devil, not the devil. Okay, another anonymous questioner asks, in Lord of the Rings, why doesn't Saruman try to recruit Radagast the Brown to join him like he does with Gandalf? To put it plainly, Saruman didn't like Radagast. He hated him, as a matter of fact. So, in their youths, Saruman was called Curumo, and Radagast was called Eyvindil. And when it came a time that the Valar, led by Manwa, came up with the idea to send several Maia to Middle-earth as Istari, as incarnates, they initially selected Curumo, Olorin, which is Gandalf, Alatar, and Polando. And then Yavanna came up with another candidate, and that was Eyvindil. That's Radagast. So Radagast was actually a fairly important figure. He had actually already been to Middle-earth. He was there when the elves awakened. And I got a few comments on this when I posted it on Quora, like, oh, I don't remember that from the Silmarillion. It's not from the Silmarillion. The book you want to read is called The Nature of Middle-earth, and it talks about the Maia that were there at the beginning, and Eyvindil is mentioned. And he was one of them that helped the elves make the journey across the sea. And he also, he had an important function. It was important to Yavanna because she had created a lot of the plants and the beasts, and that was Radagast's whole thing, was plants and beasts. Now, here's the issue, though. The Valar were looking at Saruman, and he had a lot of impatience and a lot of pride. And the reasoning for Radagast going along was not just to be the Brown, but also to be a friend and a companion specifically to Saruman, because they thought that being around someone like Radagast, that Saruman might, sort of take his example and learn patience and learn humility. But he didn't like Eyvindil. He didn't like Radagast. He thought that he was foolish. He thought that he was weak. And he spurned his friendship pretty much at every turn. The only thing that he learned from him was how to talk to birds, and Radagast was very eager to teach him something like that, thinking that Saruman would benefit greatly from communing with creatures like birds, but Saruman just used it for evil in the end. So it didn't work out too well, right? Saruman used Radagast when he needed Gandalf to come to Orthanc. He's told Radagast, you run into Gandalf, tell him I need him. And that's how it happened, is that Gandalf was coming to the Shire, because Radagast didn't know where to find Gandalf, right? Gandalf was a gentleman of no fixed address, so it's funny to mention, but, Radagast probably figured this guy is going to come to the Shire eventually, right? He's got to score some pipeweed, he likes the hobbits, right? So he just waited, by the Brandywine on the road to the Shire until Gandalf just showed up and said, hey, Saruman's looking for you. And Gandalf didn't think there was anything odd about this because, Radagast wasn't in on it. He wasn't deceiving Gandalf in any way. He was being honest. He trusted Saruman. He didn't realize that Saruman had turned against them. So, that's as far as the use for Radagast was in Saruman's mind, that he was a patsy, that he was someone to be used and discarded. He didn't look at him as a friend. He didn't think that he was wise. He didn't think that he was strong. He certainly didn't want to recruit him. He didn't like him. He didn't want him around. He only saw him as someone to be used. He was not going to be an underling. And furthermore, I think that Radagast's reaction, if Saruman had revealed his plans, would have been, we'll say, a lot less subtle than Gandalf's, right? Radagast probably would have flipped out, and he might have gotten on a boat back and gone right back to Valinor and told the Valar about it. So it's probably good that he didn't try to recruit Radagast. Okay, so next question, also anonymous, asks, if Gandalf was created in the beginning of known time, how come the Ents still call him young Master Gandalf? Are they older still? Well, no, but they don't really know what Gandalf is, right? He's a wizard to them. He looks like a man. He's been around for, the majority of the Third Age, but they don't know him beyond that. It was a great secret that Gandalf was an angel, one of the Ainur, that he's been around since the beginning of time. And I'm going to talk later about who knew the nature of Gandalf in another question. But certainly Treebeard did not know this, right? As far as Treebeard knows, he's been around in the Third Age, and that would make him young compared to Treebeard, right? Treebeard was around for the awakening of the elves. He's old. Now, while Gandalf is, of course, still older than that, he doesn't, Treebeard doesn't know that. And Gandalf is not going to correct him for so many reasons. He's not going to be like, yeah, don't you call me young, you stupid branch. It's not going to happen. Okay, next question, also anonymous, asks, what is a retcon, and can you give an example of a retcon in The Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit? So retcon is, because you might have heard this term being bandied about, it was retconned, and you might wonder what that is. It stands for retroactive continuity, and that basically means that something that was established at one point becomes contradicted later on, and the later contradiction is what's taken as the truth, and what was earlier said is a mistake of some sort, right? Maybe the character said the wrong thing, or there was a misunderstanding, or sometimes they could even go like really wild and reality itself was rewritten. So there's a really big example of a retcon involving The Hobbit going into The Lord of the Rings, right? And it has to do with the way that Bilbo obtained the One Ring. So in the original version of The Hobbit, the first edition that was put out, it was the same way he found it. It was lying there on the ground. He was stunned after being dropped by, I think, Dwalin. And then when he came to his senses, all the dwarves were gone, and he was groping around in the dark and found the ring. That's all the same. He meets Gollum, but Gollum is not really the same character. He's a lot less sinister than the Gollum that we know. And they have the riddle contest, but instead of the prize being, I will show you the way out of the mountain, the prize was supposed to be something really special, a prize, a magic ring. He didn't say magic ring at first, but he said, I will give you something special, a prize. So Bilbo wins. Gollum goes looking for the ring, not because he wants to put it on and murder Bilbo, but because he wants to give him the ring. And he starts freaking out because he can't find the ring. Bilbo's like, what's wrong? And Gollum says, I was going to give you this magic ring that makes you invisible, but I can't find it. And Bilbo's like, oh, I found that earlier. It was lying on the ground. And then Gollum is like, oh, well, that's great. You can keep that, and I'll show you the way out. Sounds a little off compared to what we know of Gollum now, right? So he's writing The Lord of the Rings now. It's the sequel to The Hobbit. But it became more than the sequel to The Hobbit. It became connected to the Silmarillion and a part of a greater narrative. And because of this, the One Ring had to be something that was pure evil. And it had to be so seductive that it would be very difficult to actually give it up. Gollum would never want to give it up, right? So there was a revised edition of The Hobbit, and this is the version that we're familiar with. The revised edition comes out. Gollum is now much, much more sinister. He promises to let Bilbo out, but when he loses, he goes back on that promise, tries to find the ring because he wants to murder murder Bilbo and eat him, can't find the ring, flips out, thinks Bilbo has the ring, which he does, chases him, Bilbo turns invisible, finds his way out, right? So that's the story we know. That's the Gollum that we know. That's the retcon. It was one way previously, and now it's a new way. And the way that they handled that was that the initial story was the story as Bilbo told it to the dwarves and to Gandalf. That's the story that he told them. He lied. And this actually worked out because, you could say that the One Ring was already corrupting him. He lied about it. And eventually, after many years of badgering him, Gandalf managed to get the truth out of Bilbo. And then, of course, he did tell the truth to Frodo as well. And then finally, at the Council of Elrond, he told the story again, this time the true story and not the false story that he had told previously. And Gloin was there too, so Gloin was like, so that's how it happened. So that's a retcon that happened, regarding the Hobbit going into the Lord of the Rings, and how it was explained in universe as being that it was a lie. Good question, though. Okay, so this next question is the follow-up that I was talking about Gandalf. And this anonymous person asked, did King Theoden know that Gandalf was a Maia? No. No, very few people would have known, right? And I actually had to compile a list, and there were some people in the comments that helped me out a little, were reminding me of some other things that I had forgotten. But I don't think any men knew that Gandalf was a Maia, except for maybe someone who might have guessed, like Aragorn, but certainly not Theoden. So I was thinking there's probably 6 characters that we can say for sure know Gandalf's nature, right? Saruman, Radagast, Alatar, Polando, Círdan, and Bilbo. And then we'll say there's a second list of 3 characters that may not know instantly but figured it out. And actually, you could put Bilbo into that category as well, because the reason that I put Bilbo at all is because he wrote the Silmarillion, right? So maybe Bilbo belongs in the second category, but I would say that Durin's Bane, because Gandalf basically identified himself when he said he was a servant of the Secret Fire. Sauron, of course, when Gandalf first showed up, he was just some wizard, some sorcerer, right? But then, of course, would come to know that this is an enemy of old, and then Tom Bombadil, right? And then we could say that there's 3 more characters that would have guessed, but maybe didn't say anything. Like, they probably had their suspicions, right? That would be Aragorn, Celeborn, and Glorfindel. And then finally, another 6 characters that I would say that they were told the truth at some point, or they were given so much information that they had to have realized, and that would be, Galadriel and Elrond, first off, because they were told by Círdan that the Astari came over the sea. So, he didn't outright say what he knew, but by saying they came from over the sea, and the fact that they're clearly not elves, obviously Galadriel and Elrond would have known that. Frodo, Sam, Gimli, and Legolas all sailed west, and Frodo and Bilbo were with him, I think actually in retrospect I would put Bilbo into that second category instead of the first category. But those are all the characters that we could say either know or come to know Gandalf's true nature. Beyond this, there might be some more that maybe suspected something was going on, right? Maybe Denethor would have suspected something was going on, but maybe wouldn't have come to the conclusion of Maia, because I don't think very many people in Middle-earth in the Third Age even knew what a Maia was, right? So that's what I would say. Definitely not Theoden. Theoden just knew him as, Mithrandir, He didn't know him as Aloran. Like I said, he might have suspected that there was something going on when Gandalf completely, changed form, but he also may have thought, well, maybe rumors of his death were exaggerated. So, you don't know. Definitely not Theoden, though. Okay. Moving along, let's see. Here we have a question asked by JJ Blocks, and JJ asks, after the destruction of the One Ring, was Sauron's spirit eventually brought to Mandos for judgment? I'm going to say probably not, right? I don't think so. I would think that he had his chance to be brought to judgment and to get some sort of punishment or mercy or some sort, something from the Valar. And that was at the end of the First Age. He passed up on that opportunity. He was told that he should go to Manwë and surrender himself. He tried to surrender to Eonwa. He was told, I'm not the guy. We got to go to Manwë, right? He passed this up. He wound up terrorizing Middle-earth for another 2 ages. I think that would get him the cold shoulder, the complete brush off from the Valar. And I'll tell you why. Sauron's not an elf. He cannot be compelled to come to Mandos as a spirit like elves can. And we have reason to believe that he would not just be welcome, not even to be judged and punished. Even if he came knocking, I don't think that they would want anything to do with him. And I would refer to the final fate of his fellow fallen Maia, Saruman. So I'm going to read you a passage from The Return of the King here. This is right after Saruman was killed. To the dismay of those that stood by, about the body of Saruman a grey mist gathered, and rising slowly to a great height like smoke from a fire, as a pale, shrouded figure it loomed over the hill. For a moment it wavered, looking to the west. But out of the west came a cold wind, and it bent away, and with a sigh dissolved into nothing. Frodo looked down at the body with pity and horror, for as he looked it seemed that long years of death were suddenly revealed in it, and it shrank, and the shriveled face became rags of skin upon a hideous skull. Lifting up the skirt of the dirty cloak that sprawled beside it, he covered it over and turned away. So, Saruman's spirit comes out of his body, right? His destroyed body, and looks to the west. West with a capital W, right? Not west of Middle-earth. West of Arda. He's looking to the Undying Lands, to Valinor, and then a cold wind blows him away. And this is basically the Valar saying, no entry. You're not coming back, not even to be punished. His body withers into nothing, and his spirit just passes away on the wind. Saruman's crimes were not nearly as extensive as Sauron's, so I think that if Saruman was not allowed back in Valinor, not even to be punished or held in Mandos, they're not going to take Sauron. Sauron would never be taken back, not even to be jailed. Okay, next question. An anonymous person asks, why did the Balrog choose Moria to hide in? How did he get there unnoticed by the dwarves, and how did he manage to get locked under miles of ground? So, okay. Firstly, I did see some other people had answered this, right? And they were wrong. The Balrog, somebody said the Balrog was there before the dwarves, before Moria, and that's not true. This specific Balrog, Durin's Bane, came fleeing after the ruin of Thangorodrim, right? The end of the War of Wrath, and that was the end of the First Age. Now, we don't know the exact time the exact year that Moria or Khazad-dûm was created and first inhabited by the dwarves, but it was during the Years of the Trees. We know that. So that means it was before the First Age. So Moria definitely already existed. Now, why would the Balrog choose Moria? It didn't choose Moria. It didn't come to Moria. It came to a place that was underneath Moria. You know, there were tunnels in the bones of the earth. And it doesn't, Tolkien's not specific about how specifically the Balrog traveled from the rune of Thangorodrim to Khazad-dûm, but it may entirely have been underground, right? It may have traveled through these tunnels and just found a place far away from Beleriand where it could sleep. And the fact that there was a dwarven city above it was unknown, right? So, and where did these tunnels come from, you may ask? We don't know. Gandalf talks about nameless things that gnaw at the roots of Arda, right? But Moria grew over times, not just outwards and upwards, but also downwards, because there was the city and there was the mine, and they eventually mined down and broke into these tunnels and awoke the Balrog. So it wasn't that there was a Balrog in Moria. There was a Balrog under Moria. And eventually they found it, and that was their doom. Okay. Next question. Do you think that Sam would have been better at resisting the corruption of the One Ring in the Lord of the Rings movies? Well, better than Frodo? Maybe. Probably. Yeah, probably, right? Would it have mattered? No. It wouldn't have mattered one bit. Sam was of stout heart, and he was a sturdy guy. He was not easily tempted by wealth or power. All he wanted was to serve his master and to have a place of his own with maybe a little bit of garden that he could tend to. The ring didn't have a lot to offer him. It didn't have a lot to work with because it reaches out to, sort of the dark part of us, right? The greed, the avarice, the pride. Sam didn't really have it. He was too good, so there was not much to work with there. But no matter how good of a person he was, no matter how sturdy of a dude he was, or how stout of heart he was, nobody could willingly destroy the One Ring. Frodo couldn't do it. Sam couldn't do it. Isildur couldn't do it. Elrond couldn't do it. Nobody could willingly destroy the ring. There was only one person that Tolkien ever described as being able to willingly destroy the One Ring. And that was actually Gollum. And this was only in a hypothetical situation where Gollum had legitimately grown fond of Frodo. And he would still steal the ring from Frodo, but then he would destroy it with intent to spite Sauron, who he hated. But even in this case, Gollum could only do this by destroying himself as well. He couldn't throw the ring into the fire. He could throw himself into the fire while carrying it. So, he was still, even in this hypothetical situation, he was still so broken by the One Ring, so bound to the One Ring that he could not part with it. He could destroy it only by destroying himself. Sam was no different, right? He wasn't bound to the ring, but he would have found some reason not to throw it in. So it never would have happened the same way. Okay, so oh boy. Okay, I knew I was going to get to this one. So this is from Mario dos Santos, and Mario asks, is The Lord of the Rings fascistic? Does it put an emphasis on the fantasy of racial purity? So, no. 1,000 times. No. Let's ask Tolkien himself, right? What did he have to say about it, right? What did he think of the fascists of his time and their race doctrine? He got a letter about this from the Nazis in Germany. This was during World War II. He had not. I think the Lord of the Rings was finished but not published, and he was trying to get it translated into many different languages, one of which was German. They wanted to work with him on this, but they asked him, "Are you Aryan?" in a letter, and he wasn't too happy about this. So he sent a letter to his publisher regarding what he had received from the Nazi Party, and I'm going to read you the text of the letter. He said, "I must say the enclosed letter from Rutten and Leuning is a bit stiff. Do I suffer this impertinence because of the possession of a German name, or do their lunatic laws require a certificate of Irish origin from all persons and all countries? Personally, I should be inclined to refuse to give any Bestätigung, though it happens that I can, and let a German translation go hang. In any case, I should object strongly to any such declaration appearing in print. I do not regard the probable absence of all Jewish blood as necessarily honorable, and I have many Jewish friends, and should regret giving any color to the notion that I subscribe to the wholly pernicious and unscientific race doctrine. You are primarily concerned, and I cannot jeopardize the chance of a German publication without your approval, so I submit 2 drafts of possible answers." So what Tolkien is saying is, he wrote a really scathing letter that was a reply, but then he thought, my publisher might not like this because it might destroy the possibility of a German translation and The Lord of the Rings being published in Germany. So he also wrote a more muted, more, neutral reply. And he sent both of these replies to his publisher and said, send back whichever one you want to, right? Now, apparently they sent back to the Germans the more neutral reply, but the scathing reply was published in the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm going to read that. So this was his more initial, heartfelt, I would say, reply to the question of whether or not he was Aryan. "Thank you for your letter. I regret that I am not clear as to what you intend by Irish. I am not of Aryan extraction, that is Indo-Iranian as far as I am aware. None of my ancestors spoke Hindustani, Persian, Gypsy, or any related dialects. But if I am to understand that you are inquiring whether I am of Jewish origin, I can only reply that I regret that I appear to have no ancestors of that gifted people. My great-great-grandfather came to England in the 18th century from Germany. The main part of my descent is therefore purely English, and I am an English subject, which should be sufficient. I have accustomed, nonetheless, to regard my German name with pride, and continue to do so throughout the period of the late regrettable war in which I served in the English army. I cannot, however, forbear to comment that if impertinent and irrelevant inquiries of this sort are to become the rule in matters of literature, then the time is not far distant when a German name will no longer be a source of pride. Your inquiry is doubtless made in order to comply with the laws of your own country, but that this should be held to apply to the subjects of another state would be improper, even if it had, and it has not, any bearing whatsoever on the merits of my work or its sustainability for publication, of which you appear to have satisfied yourselves without reference to my Abstammung. So, Tolkien pulls apart the race doctrine. He even pointed out that the Nazis used an improper definition of the word Aryan to refer to racially pure Germans. He also referred to the German Chancellor Adolf Hitler in another letter as a ruddy little ignoramus and an embarrassment to Europe as a whole. Any allegorical reading of Tolkien's work as a racist or fascist fantasy are invalid, just as any allegorical readings of The Lord of the Rings are invalid in general. He disliked allegory. He hated the idea of anyone telling his readers what his work was about. He wanted them to figure it out for themselves, to apply it to what they wished. He called that the freedom of the reader. So, yeah, definitely a big no to that. And finally, last question, and this person asks, when Frodo was attacked by the Witch King, he called out the name of Elbereth. Were the Valar known to hobbits generally, even as myths or legends? So I would say the hobbits really didn't know the Valar, right? They didn't know who the Valar was, they didn't know their names, but Frodo had some good teachers. So we first hear of Elbereth, which is the Sindarin name for Varda, being sung by the host of Gildor and Glorian, which Frodo, Sam, and Pippin come across in the woods. And Frodo immediately recognizes the name, and that he recognizes that because they said Elbereth, that these are high elves. Frodo learned what he knows of elven lore from Bilbo, and Bilbo was an elf friend. He taught Frodo much of the Sindarin language, to the point where he admonished Frodo for not knowing what Dunedain was, because he referred to Aragorn as the Dunedain. And Frodo thought that was yet another name because he was Aragorn, he was Strider, now he's the Dunedain. And Bilbo said that Dunedain is a title. Dunedain. It's Elvish. You should know this. I taught you this. It means he's from Numenor, or of Numenor. So Strider also taught the hobbits a bit of lore. He mostly spoke of Beren and Luthien, of course, but yeah. Frodo was taught all this by Bilbo, and Bilbo was taught all this by the elves themselves. Generally speaking, hobbits really didn't know all this stuff. They didn't know who the Valar were. Okay, so that's all I have for this week. Leave me some comments, subscribe if you enjoy the content, hit the bell and all that stuff. Of course, if you have questions, you can reach out to me on Quora. The link is in the description. I will see you guys next week.